Hi, Chip.
Oh, well, I'm looking for you. Hi, Mark.
Good afternoon.
I hate to say this, but there we go. Perfect. I got you. Um, good afternoon. I am full of colorful, uh,
Yes.
dreamlike images behind me, and you've got a beautiful image behind you on behind your left shoulder. What is that?
So that is the medicine Buddha, and I brought that back from my last trip to Bhutan. And the
Oh,
idea of the medicine Buddha is it's particularly uh, it's a healing Buddha. So it's the for healers and people in our line of work, it's a good sort of message to be emanating, that sense of healing.
so it's a perfect segue into your new book,
Exactly.
From Suffering to Peace, the True Promise of Mindfulness. So, what inspired you to write this book that is, in some ways, in many ways, about healing?
Yes. So, as you know, I've been meditating for a long time, about 30 plus years, and teaching for the last 20, and teaching in a lot of different environments. I've been teaching in mainstream Buddhist settings and also within organizations and nonprofits and schools, psychology, business, healthcare, you name it. And so I feel like I've had a really good window on the explosion of the mindfulness movement the last 15 years, particularly the last 10 years, where it's really become mainstream, lots of good science, and pretty much everybody in some field, in every sector of society, promoting it. And of course, when anything explodes that big, that quickly, with all the hype around it, that what I was seeing was there was a sense of the original meaning, context, and depth was being lost in the effort to spread it, to mainstream it, and to get the word out. And so, having trained in the tradition where mindfulness has been developed for thousands of years, I wanted to share how you take the depth of that, translate it for a mainstream audience without losing the depth and the subtlety, and really to point back to what the original meaning of mindfulness is about, which is not just attention, but really about developing awareness as a support for insight, understanding, and freedom. Freedom
Mm,
of the heart, freedom of the mind, freedom in the world.
beautiful. How would you say it's different than your last two books?
So my first book, Awake in the Wild, was really about
Which is such a good book.
yes, thank you.
For those who are listening, if you haven't read Mark's book, that book is stunning. I'm sure this one's better. I've actually gotten to read early version of this one, and it's spectacular too. But Awake in the Wild is awesome.
Great. Well, thank you. So yeah, that's feels like my soul's work, which is integrating mindfulness and nature. So if you want to take that contemplative awareness outside and really learn from nature as a teacher, then that book is like a manual in how to be outside with a contemplative, mindful attention and all the riches that come from that. And then my second book was, again, using mindfulness as a way to understand our mind. And one of the most problematic, annoying, painful parts of our mind is our judging, critical, comparing, negative, deprecating mind, the way we talk to ourselves so critically. And so I noticed how so many students I work with were crippled by that in ways that I was. And so I wrote that book as a way to help people specifically use mindfulness and compassion to work with the critic. And this book is much more about the whole panorama of mindfulness, both in theory and practice and application, from its depths to its heights.
Mm. So, given that we've spent many years together, and I've gotten to really enjoy your personal story, it's not like you were born on a hippie farm where your parents sent you out to the backyard to meditate for the afternoon. How did you get to be where you are today as a mindfulness teacher, and what was your process to learning to meditate?
Right. Yeah. Again, great question. So, well, long story. So I grew up in Northern England in a very working class background, and ended up going to London, and but through just this not atypical young life, but I was definitely confused. And when I got to London, I was got into left-wing politics and anarchy, but was internally, I had a lot of internal stress, pain, unresolved traumas, and so I was searching, and you know, I got into punk, I got into politics, I got into anarchy, I got into squatting houses, ended up squatting a Buddhist housing association, and happened to be.
Did you have a mohawk?
I did. I had a white mohawk.
Okay, mohawk and meditating. They both
big earrings. You know, make my own clothes. I was kind of a wild child, and they said, you know, check out this meditation. You might, you know, confused young man who's squatting our houses. You might learn something, and you know, not be so, you know, whatever I was doing. So anyhow, I got into meditation, and it was completely a life changer. It was like having, you know, being blind and then being given sight. It was like, oh, I had a window into my own mind. Not that I hadn't seen my mind before, but there's something about meditation that really gives you that clarity. And I saw just particularly how negative, critical, judgmental, mean, angry, and how much I was just creating a lot of my own stress, angst, depression. And so that became a lifelong learning. I dropped out of college. I moved into a meditation center. I went to India, studied, and then came to the States to study. And it's really that's been the center of my life, is how do we wake up? How do we understand our mind? How do we live with this mind, body, heart in a way that finds peace and ease in the world, which is easier said than done.
Well, that's what I was going to ask about, the easier said than done. You've already expressed some of the benefits of mindfulness, but when you see people learning for the first time, what do you see as some of the early benefits that they get, as well as then maybe the later benefits that they get?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, of course, that's quite a range, and you know, depending on what people, where and what people have come from. So I'd say in the beginning, it gives people some basic tools to work with their mind. You know, we generally, I think the general sort of view is we come into this world with our family conditioning, cultural conditioning, whatever, and we're sort of stuck with our lot. And what mindfulness and meditation and these tools give is, well, you certainly come in with a lot of stuff and conditioning and baggage and habits, most of them not so healthy. And mindfulness initially gives people I think the agency and the confidence to be able to work with some of those habits, to unhook from the ones that are painful. Mm-hmm. And actually, one of the first things we see is how much we think, how much we're lost in thought, how distracted we are, how much of our views are not so helpful or actually accurate. And so we begin to realize we have some choice about what's happening in our mind. So we don't have to follow every thought, believe every view, act on every reaction. And so it starts to grow a little sense of spaciousness and a little ease. And then over time, that develops into much greater stability. And also, it starts to awaken the heart. We become more empathic. We become more kinder, more sensitive to others. And, you know, over time, it's not that we become perfect in any way. It's not about becoming perfect. It's really actually welcoming our humanness and all of the mess that is, but meeting that with a little more clarity and a little less reactivity.
You also write about embodied awareness. That seems like something that you maybe develop over time. What is embodied awareness?
Yeah. So I think this is a really important quality, because often we associate meditation as this sort of out of the body, either slightly blissful or transcendent experience. And you know, that can happen. It's not that common, but it happens. And mindfulness is an in the body experience, in that the most useful and helpful vehicle for getting present is our body. Our body is always present. Our senses are in the present. So when we're connected to our body and our sensory experience, that's a much stronger doorway to actually learn how to stay in the present moment. And so mindfulness practice, whether we're using the breath or walking meditation or sitting and becoming aware of the body, when we practice that day in, day out, and also practice that in our lives as we, you know, walk the dog and chop carrots and go swimming and we can learn how to stay present to our physical experience, which is a beautiful support for then learning how to stay present in life and in work and in relationships. And over time, that embodied experience also becomes very pleasurable. It's actually grounding and settling to be in one's body and to be present there. It's a very, I find a very soothing, calming, grounding experience.
What are some common day things that people do that when they could actually apply that kind of embodied awareness, or at least maybe a little bit of mindfulness, or even an awake, even eye-open meditation? Is it something you do when you drive, like in traffic, or stand in a bank line? Although thank God most of us don't have to do that anymore. When would you use it if you were sort of like just trying to do a little snackable version of it?
Right. So, for example, like I was just giving a presentation at REI headquarters yesterday. And so here I am on stage, and there's a couple hundred people watching. And that ability for me to just stay present and relaxed in my body was a great support for being able to stay grounded and clear when I was giving a lecture, for example. Or maybe you're about to have a stressful conversation with someone. And if you have ability to stay present in your physical experience, you're more likely to actually be grounded and be present enough to have that conversation, for example.
That sounds like a way to create a more peaceful earth too. I guess from suffering to peace is not just for on a personal side. It's sort of this is a society as well, it seems.
Yeah. So the book's divided into four, having freedom in the body, in the mind, the heart, and the world. And really, the point of this practice is, how do we live? How do we relate? How do we engage with each other and life and not cause more suffering, but actually bring more wisdom, more kindness, more clarity, more care into the world? And so, again, my experience is, if we're not aware, we're much more likely to be reactive, act out our unconscious biases, dump our emotions all over the place. And when there's more self-awareness, then I think we generally just become a better human being, and nicer to be around. I often say to people, like I just finished teaching a meditation retreat at Spirit Rock, and I said, to 100 people that were there, you've done a great thing for your friends and families and everyone who knows you. It looks kind of selfish and self-indulgent to go off on a retreat for a week and what people think is navel gazing, but actually you come back as a better human being, and what a great gift to everybody that you know.
Oh, that's a beautiful thought. I love that. The last couple of years in a row, we've been lucky enough to have you come down to our Modern Elder Academy in Southern Baja. And I think you have a chapter that's entitled Meeting Aging with Kind Awareness. So talk about that. I guess you and I have aged a little bit since we first met each other, and we have a lot of modern elders.
Gray.
Yes. So how do you use this practice to address aging?
Yeah. Well, the practice of mindfulness really, I think of as it's a cultivation of wisdom, right? And because mindfulness is helping us meet experience, meet the truth, meet reality, meet life as it is. And one of the main things that we notice in life is things change and things get older, especially us. And that's not easy. As we get older, our energy wanes, we have more aches and pains. We may lose respect, as people often explore at the Elder Academy, or feel a sense of not knowing one's place, etc. And also we tend to as we get older, lose loved ones, lose friends, as they also age and die. And the ability to not run from that, the ability to hold that without ignoring it, suppressing it, denying it, and to looking it square in the face, and to accepting, of course, I'm aging, you're aging, we're getting older, things change, things wear out like bodies. I found that, having done that for 35 years, that what that gives me is, I'm not surprised when shit happens. I'm not surprised when I hear about someone getting sick. A dear friend of mine's mother just, I was attending her Mother's Day gathering, and her mother was there. And her mother's grandmother, happy, healthy, big family. And the next day she has a stroke and she's in a coma in hospital and probably won't recover. And, you know, the practice, as painful as that experience is, you know, it gives us a certain stability and resilience and capacity to meet that, to not be so, even though it's shocking, it's to not be so shocked by it. Even though it's surprising, not to be so surprised by it, or not to be thrown off center. So of course we feel the pain and the sorrow and the loss, but it creates a certain steadiness. And that's it. And it also gives a sense of confidence or courage to people around us. You know, I feel like I can be a much better supporter of people going through that, because, you know, I'm not lost in, you know, protesting, fighting against that reality. It's like, of course that happens, and it's terribly tragic, and here we are. You know, it actually gives rise to compassion.
You also have a chapter on embracing death's invitation, which it sounds like you could use that same approach to sort of preparing yourself for the ultimate.
Yeah, definitely. You know, that's where it's a one-way street. There's only one exit door, and we're all hurtling there at some point or other.
There are a lot of ways people try to actually change the one-way street, but at the end of the day, it's no one's been able to solve that one yet.
Right. You might have to come back again. That's a whole other option. Yeah. Why not? Yeah. But I think you know, I mean, what happens with mindfulness is as we pay close attention to our experience, right? Whether it's our breath, our body, our heart, feelings, relationships, worldly events, you know, we see that we live in this chaotic, transient, conditioned world. And the more that we see that microscopically in our heart, mind, body, the more that we find an ability to move more with that flow rather than fight it. Because we see that fighting is pointless. It allows us to not hold on to things so much, because we know that however beautiful, wonderful, difficult, whatever they are, they're going to change. And so there's a certain monotony of meditation practice. There's a certain it's just like going to the gym and you work out and you do your exercise and strength training. And, you know, for the most part, it's not that interesting, but it's a way that we cultivate and train. And that training is what supports us meet life, especially in the difficult times.
So one of the other things you talk about in the book is the epidemic of self-judgment. So why do you think there is an epidemic of self-judgment? And then how does mindfulness address that in any ways that you haven't already spoken about? Yeah.
Well, I'm not so great with the why questions.
It's okay.
You know, who knows?
Who knows?
You know, I mean, I think, you know, I can certainly point to reasons why it's getting worse. I think social media, particularly, you know, the fact that everybody is looking at everybody else's perfect life and ours is just, you know, mundane and normal. I think that's given rise, you know, especially with teens looking at the fanaticism around beauty and this perfect image that we need to portray to the world. I think that's in the Instagram culture is not helping. And yeah, I can't say the root. I think it's, you know, we can look generationally and see that, you know, our past generations have also been critical. I think it does seem to be getting worse. I do think we have, you know, I think since with digital technology, I think there's an increase, and, you know, but regardless of the cause, you know, we can, one of the greatest transformations we can see with mindfulness practice is actually working with the critic, because most people, when they encounter this topic and through meditation, they become they're just sort of surprised at how loud the voice is, how common it is, how frequent it is, and how inaccurate it is. And normally, the reason why the critic, the inner critic, the judging mind has so much prominence is because, you know, we've lived with it, we've grown up with it since we were young. And it's just become part of our living room furniture. We know the words, we know the stories, we know the judgments, and we just let it drone on and on in the background, thinking, well, it's just, you know, it's just part of my mind, it's just who I am. Give myself a hard time, but what's the big deal? And we laugh it off, But actually, if we listen to those words and we actually take them seriously, they're very damaging, harsh, cruel, painful. And so what mindfulness does is allows us to see them, and then gives us the choice. Do I want to listen to that? Do I want to give that attention? Do I want to believe that voice that tells me I'm stupid, I'm worthless, and I'm no good, and I'm going to fail and all that? So it gives us freedom to unhook slowly, day by day, moment by moment. And that's very freeing.
So here's a question. I mean, again, this is somewhat of a rhetorical question, but if mindfulness is so damn great, why aren't more people doing it more regularly? I guess you could say the same thing about flossing your teeth, but tell us more. Why is it that some people find it hard to get started, or hard to keep it going?
Yeah. Well, I think, on one level, it is work, like who wants to go to work on a Sunday morning, right? Who wants to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning before work on a cold day in Chicago and sit on a meditation cushion and be with your busy mind and crazy thoughts for half an hour? Like it's a discipline, right? Just like, we all know exercise is great for us, and how many of us actually do it that often, or eating, whatever it is, kale or, and so it does require some time. It requires dedication. It requires patience and perseverance. It requires a lot of practice, a lot of other qualities. And so it is an amazing quality that we all have. It's not like we're not unmindful. Everybody has some modicum of mindfulness. Otherwise you'd crash your car and, put your coffee in your ear. And but it's like this latent jewel that we haven't really, it's like covered in dust and clay that we need to brighten. And so I think mostly one is a lot of people just haven't had the education, like, it's now with just the explosion of interest with science and psychology and healthcare, millions and millions of people are getting to know about it and then putting it into practice to some degree. And I think that mindfulness wave is growing because it does work. But like anything, it is work, and it takes practice. And most of us want would rather take a pill, rather get some surgery, or get a brain implant whenever that AI gets to the point where it will, you just put in a little chip and we become mindful. Because it takes effort, and we have to go against old habits and patterns and laziness and conditioning, and we're creatures of habit, and we'd rather stay in the familiar little box and actually come out into the wide open sky. Mm-hmm. So it means we stretch. It means we also have to look at uncomfortable things. And this is one of the sort of the myths I try to bust with the book is, mindfulness has been sort of touted as panacea from anything from ADD to anorexia to you name it. And that might be true. It does help many, many physical and mental conditions. But as we become aware, we also become aware of the totality of our experience. And that also means becoming aware of our pain, our physical discomfort, painful mental habits, perhaps difficult emotions. And many of us would rather either go to sleep or check out or numb out than actually feel the hard stuff. And as we cultivate mindfulness, it does require that we become open to the entirety of our experience. And that means also being comfortable with hanging out with pain or discomfort or boredom or other harder states.
Well, like our unconscious bias. You want to talk about that for a moment? I mean, does mindfulness help you to see your unconscious bias and maybe even shift them?
Yeah. Well, the preliminary data of the research around it is yes. And of course, anything unconscious is hard to see, which is why it's unconscious. And mindfulness, as much as it brings a light of awareness, there's plenty of stuff that's going to remain unconscious, and our biases, particularly around race and gender and inequality, some of those biases are really strong. But I think with mindfulness, we can begin to see some of those distortions, some of those misperceptions, or at least challenge some of the views that we've grown up with that we might not challenge if we weren't developing self-awareness. So it's a support. It's not a cure, but it does help. I mean, uncovering and working through bias also means we educate ourselves, means we put ourselves in situations where we can learn, where we can have those, some of those unconscious biases challenged.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and maybe build some more empathy as well.
Right.
I've always had this frustration with mindfulness or mindlessness. I mean, when someone's being mindful, it suggests that their mind is full. And I thought mindfulness is really about being less in your mind, and
Right.
so or even minding other people less. So can you just like try to help us with that one, because especially for those of us who are somewhat novices, it's
Right.
it's hard to understand how mindful as a word ever got started.
Yeah. Well, I'll hardly call you a novice, but anyhow, yeah, it's a weird word, and as you say, it's sort of the opposite of what it sounds like. I mean, it's more like, awareful, if that was a word. It doesn't sound that great either. You could say awake, which is a nicer word. As you become more mindful, you become more awake, you become more clear, you see more fully, you're less caught in stuff, in reactivity. So it's actually, I mean, we don't have a word for it, but light and awake, I think, would be a better translation of what mindful is. Light, awake, peaceful,
Wow.
So, and it comes from an old Victorian word that was very clunkily translated.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh.
And actually, the most accurate translation from the scholars I know, of sati, which is the original root word, is either clear awareness or lucid awareness. And that's a much more like, oh yeah, I get that. When you cultivate mindfulness, you become lucidly aware of everything, yourself, others, the world. And how great is that?
That's beautiful. I like that. I have two more questions. Of all the places you've meditated in the world, is there a particular place that you've felt like you most were at peace in your meditation? Or do you think that that's somewhat of a crazy idea that people go off to the Himalayas and meditate on a mountaintop? You can do it anywhere, and it can be just as good anywhere. Do you have any thought on that one?
Yeah. Well, as you know, I have a bias because I spend most of my time outside, meditating outside. And so for me, anywhere outside is my favorite place to meditate. That could be, walking up in the woods behind my house, 10 minutes here, or it could be in the desert or in the mountains. And there's something just about being outside, as long as you're not like outside at a bus station, or in the middle of a freeway intersection, where there's some nature around, trees, grasses, desert, whatever. There's just something very profound and amazing about being outside in the elements, breathing fresh air, connected to bird life, insect life, breeze, the weather. So for me, anytime I go outside, that I immediately access a sense of quieter, more peaceful, more spacious, more relaxed, more open, more joyful. And I think that's available for anybody, actually, even just sitting on a park bench or sitting on which I do often, on my porch window, and put on my deck outside. So ultimately, it doesn't really matter where you are, it's the state of mind, but definitely supportive conditions, whether it's being in nature or a nice, lovely meditation hall, can help. But ultimately, it's really what's going on in our mind that's key. Because you could be in the most beautiful, temple in Japan meditating, but if your mind's worrying about, where you're going to go for lunch, then it doesn't really matter where you are.
Yeah, that's for sure. So final question is, what do you most hope that your readers will take away from your new book, From Suffering to Peace?
Yeah. Well, I hope that they realize, one, mindfulness is very accessible and doable by anybody. Two, that you can learn to train and cultivate the quality and practice through meditation. And three, that people see that this quality and practice of mindfulness leads to deep understanding, insights, and ultimately freedom and peace. So that's my wish for everybody reading the book.
Well, that is a plentiful wish that I think is a great wish for the planet. So Mark, thank you so much for what you offer, so much wisdom, so much so much embodied awareness yourself of what you've experienced along the way, and then you are open to sharing it. So it's a pleasure to be in your life and to read your books, and excited about this new one.
Thank you. Well, great to have this conversation with you. And, I've just appreciated both our friendship and also your exploration of mindfulness, which has been a long journey in itself. And to see how that's flowering in your work at Modern Elder Academy and in your life. And I think you're a great example of how this practice really helps all of us and grow and develop and lighten and become more free and greater, be able to do greater work in the world.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Nice to see you, my friend. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.